So once we have requirements, now we got to prioritize them, okay? Because we can't do everything all at once. It's just not possible, even if we were able to bend the laws of time and space, which I'm sure some of our clients would like us to be able to do. But the reality of the situation is that it simply isn't possible. So we have to make some hard decisions about what gets included overall in the entire project. And also, when you're thinking in terms of development sprints where you're doing a chunk of the project at a time, what can we do in what period of time? If we're going to have 2-week sprints and 2-week reviews, every 2 weeks we're going to check our progress and look at what we've built. What gets included now? What has to wait? Regardless of whether you're trying to decide, overall what the entire set of requirements is, or whether you're just trying to prioritize for the next 2 weeks, you still have to answer some specific questions. So the place to start is to associate the requirements you have with strategic objectives. See what lines up with the various strategic needs and goals that you identified at the beginning of the project. And that usually means asking 4 questions. First, does the requirement fulfill a user need? Is it in line with something that we know users of the system or the product or the app need to do or need to have access to? Next, does the requirement fulfill a business objective? Is the requirement a stepping stone to getting the business the return on investment that they want? Is it getting them the use and adoption that they want? Does it meet one of their stated goals or objectives? How feasible is the requirement? Can we actually design it, build it, and test it? Are we able to do it with the people that we have, with the time that we have, with the budget that we have? Right? Is it realistic? Can we actually do this? And finally, are there any potential conflicts between requirements? As you look across your list, are there any things that seem to be sort of in opposition with each other? And chances are, on almost every project, there's almost at least one. You're always going to find one where there's 2 things that don't quite live too well together. And usually what happens is an altogether new requirement, comes out of that scenario. These are the things that have to get explored and recognized and understood before you go forward. One of my personal rules of thumb is that any requirement that's not in line with the project strategy is out of scope. If it doesn't help us further our goals, either on the user side or the business side, then we probably shouldn't be doing it in the first place. The next thing we have to ask ourselves in terms of prioritizing our requirements is, how does each requirement affect the product itself? The way to answer that question is to separate all the requirements into 3 categories. And the first is requirements that make the product useful. Is this useful to a customer? Is it useful to us? Is it useful to our partners and suppliers? So requirements category number 1 are things that make the product useful. Next up are requirements that make the product saleable. Could we sell it if we had this? Does it help us sell the product if we had this feature? And by sell, I don't just mean an exchange of dollars and cents. Your goal with anything that you produce is to get people to use it. There's some convincing that needs to happen. And whether they're giving you money or not to use it, you still have to sort of sell the idea. So again, does this requirement add something of value that sort of helps you sell it? And finally, there are requirements that make the product buildable. Can we affordably build this? Is this something that we can easily do? Is it difficult to do? Is it going to require extra resources? Is it right in line with our skill set? Okay, anything and everything that falls into the category of making it possible to build goes in this 3rd category. And one thing I want to mention here is that your work in the strategy plane should have identified a clear hierarchy of priorities across all 3 of these areas. If you had a decent discovery session or several conversations or brainstorming or whatever it is, chances are you're going to have priorities that fall in each one of those 3 categories without even trying. And the final takeaway in terms of doing requirements right is that you have to consider external forces. And that's because every single force that acts upon a project evolves requirements. Here's what I mean by that. Requirements have to be filtered through every force at play that affects the product itself, the end product that you're designing, and the project. And that's any number of things. It could be audience needs, could be client desires, ethical obligations, aesthetic inclinations, right? Everyone's got their own opinion of what's good and what's bad and what looks good and what looks bad, et cetera, et cetera. Material properties, what are we using to build it? Cultural presuppositions, right? Everyone has ideas about how the way things should work. Functional requirements, time. How much time do we have to do this, to pull this off? What's our budget? What are our resources? How many people? Is it just a one-man show here, or do we have, 6 bodies that we could sort of divide and conquer with? So every one of those forces evolves requirements because they all have an impact on whether you can or cannot include that feature. They all have an impact on how well you will be able to define and design and develop that feature. So try not to get yourself, sort of locked into the vacuum of, okay, I know exactly what my requirements are. Let's go. Not so fast. Think about all the things external to you and external to the project that could have an impact on what you can and cannot do.